Welcome to the Social Media Church podcast. I'm Nils Smith, and I am joined by three of my favorite people in the world. If my wife were here, it would be probably my four favorite people, and well, maybe six of my kids as well. So I will first introduce my co-host, and then I'm going to, Aaron, let you introduce our special guest. So Aaron Magnuson, my co-host for the Social Media Church podcast. Aaron, welcome to today's podcast.
Yeah, I'm super excited to do this podcast. Nils, we've probably been sitting on this podcast for quite a bit of time. This is long overdue, but it's kind of a perfect
episode
season.
300, and so this is a special.
This is
episode.
300 right here.
This is 300 right here.
There's nobody else that we would have rather had. Perfect.
Yes.
Perfect crew to have on here. Today we are joined by the online pastors of Transformation Church. Yes, the Transformation Church that you are so curious to know everything about. We get to sit in with their online pastors, and Nils and I actually have the pleasure of working closely with this team and just helping them strategize digitally. And so we get to have plenty of these conversations, and it is about time that we hit record on one of these conversations. So today, Nils and I are joined by Pastor Demario and Julia, aka Jules, the Tuckers. They are joining us. Welcome, guys.
What's up?
Hey, guys. Thanks for having us.
This is good. This is going to be fun.
This really is.
It is going to be fun. I met and I met both of you, but primarily hung out with Demario about 6 months ago, and I had seen the transformation journey, watching it a little bit. I actually, Demario, and I don't know if you know this, I emailed you probably a year and a half ago to invite you on this podcast, but I'm sure it got lost in your email. And because I was just curious, I just cold emailed. I looked you up online.
Epic.
But I luckily
Wow.
I weaseled my way in to now get this conversation happening. But this story, I think the deeper I have gone on the inside of Transformation Church, it just gets more and more beautiful. It is God's fingerprint all over it, and it is a combination of Pastor Mike, I think who is the face so much of Transformation Church, but I think it's the leadership around. I think the vision, but also just the movement of God that has happened, and so you guys are the first staff people of Transformation Church. Can you guys share just quickly the last maybe 10-year journey of Transformation Church and how it all began?
Yeah, that's man, big question. We could be here for the rest of the day talking about that, but just to kind of go back. I joined Transformation Church, which was actually Greenwood Christian Center, back in 2007, which is right after I proposed to my wife. She was at Greenwood Christian Center. I was at another church, and I just was like, okay, this is where we're going to set up our stake. And so I started attending, and shortly after I became involved with our founding pastor, Bishop Gary. I became his armor bearer, basically his personal assistant. For any for his Sunday meetings, or if he was out of town, that kind of thing. I just basically became his personal assistant. And I did that for 8 years.
And how big was the church back then?
So we had a few, we kind of oscillated. So I think when I first got there, we're probably around 500.
Okay. And
then we exploded to like 1,200. We were doing multiple services.
Okay.
And then we had the unfortunate happenings of a church split. And our membership kind of went down to, we might have been around 200 at the
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that was kind of I was definitely.
Yeah. So you've been through it already.
Yeah. That was definitely.
And Julia, how long were you there before Demario?
Man, so probably 2003, maybe.
Yeah.
And was that when the church started, or the church is older than that?
The church is older than that. So
Okay.
I came out here for college, and I happened to find Greenwood at the time, Transformation Church now, but I found that because I was looking for another church, and we couldn't find that church on that Sunday. I was riding with some people from college and landed there, and I mean, they sold me at the time. I loved what they were doing in youth ministry, that the youth weren't the back seat, and so they were very intentional with that, and that's really what sold me. And so I'm not going to say that was the only church I went in Tulsa. I think I've only been a part of two churches, two churches in Tulsa. Yeah. So yeah,
That's crazy.
yeah.
So talking about, just kind of the ups and downs, we came to that point where we were kind of we're surviving, but then, Pastor Michael, he came in as initially just as a sound guy.
As a sound guy. So as a sound person, and if you look at it, and just to say, like, our journey, we've had the opportunity to serve in a variety of places.
Yes.
Like, I've done a lot of creative things. So what is it? Sound booth stuff and all of those things. Serving Pastor Debbie at the time, a little bit of that. We've done groups, all of them. Groups. Yeah. So it's funny to look at it now, like, there probably isn't too many places where we haven't served. Really, probably the only place is somewhat HR, if air quotes on that, because we had to do some stuff on that from the ground floor. But it's given us a unique perspective to see, I would say, the mountaintops as well as the valleys. Like the season that Dee's referring back to, there's that split, and you've got to imagine what the founding pastor was going through at that time. You have P. Mike, who comes in, and he's running, at the time I'm on the worship team, but he's running sound. And then at some point he becomes basically the worship director, and so then he's leading worship rehearsals and all of those different things. And then shortly after that, I say shortly after that, but he has a conversation with his parents and Bishop, because his parents were leading a church that they were planning. And as Pastor Mike would say it, like, God knew that the only way that he could get him serving into ministry was by having his parents lead a church. And I know he was helping them get their stuff together, and he had this epiphany and felt God like, hey, why don't we join forces with Transformation Church?
Well, he was their
amazing
young adult pastor. And so, like Jill said, they had that epiphany. Why don't we combine forces, and so he became Greenwood's youth and young adult pastor.
Right.
That was a ministry called SoFly. Exploded. It was
we like
crazy.
You. Yeah. Y'all know P. Mike, he likes acronyms, okay?
Yes. And it was honestly like everything that you see in P. Mike today, it was all of that. It was creative, it was music, it was out of the box. Sermon titles that just caught your attention. It was just all of that. Kind of in its infancy. So
now we've seen really quick, D. We've seen a lot of stuff come out about because Pastor Mike did a great job of documenting, or at least having some sort of videography of a lot of this early stuff. But the one thing that can't be talked about from a third party or somebody outside, no matter how much media they have, can only be talked about by people who are actually there for when this happened. And what I'm curious about, what was both of your very first impression when Pastor Mike rolled through that door as the sound engineer or whatever he was doing? What was your first impression of Pastor Mike?
What's funny, it's like, this sounds super awkward, but for me, it was that I had seen his face before, because he's got a bunch of brothers. So around town, like, I was like, man, he looks like, I bet you they're a family, And so I hadn't known who he was, or even the Todds prior to them coming through, to be honest. We heard some stuff in reference to Higher Dimensions and a group that started. So for me in the worship realm, it was like, all right, we're finally going to get some stability, and maybe the sound is going to be great, on a consistent basis, know? So. Yeah.
For me, I would say my first real impression was nice but cocky. It's like, man, he's got that edge to him. He's just, and so Mike, he's confident. Mike is going to walk into a room and fill it up. But definitely, I think that first impression was like, okay, he's smelling.
Was it attractive or was it repulsive? Like, you saw it, but you were kind of like, man, but I want to get in on that. Like, or was it like, man, what does this guy think he's doing? Like, why is he here?
I'll say for me, after a few encounters with him, it was definitely attractive. The first thing I noticed about Pastor Mike was that he remembered my name from the first time that I ever told it to him. He is, and we talked about that. I was like, Mike, you are good at remembering names. Like, I literally, that's just one of the things that God put on my heart to do, that like when I meet someone, I remember their name. And so that was one of the things that stood out to me so much about him, was that he's one of the only people that like knew my exact name from one time of me encountering him. So definitely it was like, okay, man, he's an interesting guy. You know, I think there was a gradual what do you call it? Affinity. It's like, man, I'd like to get to know him.
Yeah.
You know?
For me, obviously, fellow creative. And so there's a lot of things that we kind of think alike on to an extent. And so, I mean, I remember him finding out just like from a production end, like I went to his home studio where he was sharing it with roommates. And it was like, I got to learn more because I was in my infancy of producing music. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, yo, anytime I can come over and just let's do it, you know? And so definitely on that end, like, I mean, it was an easy attraction from that standpoint.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome.
I love it.
Carry on with the story.
Nils, so Greenwood, you know, in that transition, how did Pastor Mike move into that role, and what was the journey in those kind of first days of Transformation Church?
Ooh. Yeah. So that journey, obviously the merger happens and between his parents' church and Transformation Church. And during that season, there was a word that the name of the church would change. And so that actually happened prior to, I want to say prior to him becoming the executive pastor. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But there was a lot of conversation, obviously, with leadership and different things with him coming in. And taking more of a, I'm going to say executive pastor role without the title. So, I mean, you know, Mike's going to come through, he's going to shake everything up. Yes. You know, it's like, let me disrupt your world, disrupt it and stuff. And I think what's cool is like Bishop allowed the space for him to develop and for him to grow, you know, and so it ruffles feathers. You know, but anything that's out of the norm, we'll do that, you know? Yeah. And so I think after, I don't remember how long, maybe 6 months or something like that.
Yeah, I believe it was 6 months of him basically functioning as executive pastor, that he then became the actual executive pastor in title and function. Yeah. And so I think we rocked with that for, was it a year?
I'm not quite sure of how long, but I think, I'm not fully sure of how long, but in the midst of that, Bishop had a medical issue that popped up, which then put P. Mike on the forefront of speaking every single Sunday. And it was something that was unexpected on Bishop's end. And so I think that sped up the process of transition. Like,
because up through that point, he had basically been speaking to the youth on Sunday night or Wednesday night. But that particular incident elevated him to speaking every Sunday morning for, several weeks in a row. And it just began to, I think that it began to turn people's, I'm just trying to think.
It began to give him a voice and influence and a weight to his voice within our church.
Yes. Yeah.
And what was the response to that voice initially? Like what were some of those early messages? He's up there, very different. For those of you that follow Transformation Church for any length of time, you've seen both of these pastors preach very different styles. They talk about it openly, which is so great. But what was the response to somebody like Pastor Mike getting, or was there enough familiarity in the youth that they kind of already knew what this guy was about? Or what was the response to the congregation?
It was rough. There was transitions. Like you got Bishop's going to clock you at a cool 45, hit you with your 3 points in your scripture, and so it was easier to take those notes. Yeah. And, just for a reminder, like it was P. Mike in his infancy. Like when it was so fly, my man could stand flat footed for 2-3 hours and teach. He'd be like, oh my God, are we ever going home? And so even on Sundays, like some of those takeover Sundays, like where SoFi would take over a Sunday morning service, it was kind of that same thing. And so I think there were moments where it was people were having to get adjusted to that, get adjusted to the length of time. Because people knew, hey, you're going to come here and you're going to be out by this time, and I would say, I feel like youth, it was almost from a youth standpoint prior to him speaking mainly on Sundays, the only time that you really felt their influence was when it was a takeover Sunday. And so I think there was a lot of things, even for P. Mike, that he learned and why there had been some other transitions later on in his leadership for that. And so, it was very interesting. It was adjustments for people. I think it was definitely adjustment for him from a communication standpoint. Like probably one of the songs that we did in offering was if you what is it? If you ain't a cheerful giver, then keep your stanky dollars.
Yes.
And so it's like everybody be there, you know. Yeah. And so you know, it's gonna ruffle some feathers when you start doing new things, you know, lights and foggers and all of that, and noise. It's like, oh, my allergies. Like there were so many different things, but obviously the vision of God prevailed, you know. So yeah.
That's awesome. So then he just kept going. And what was that? Then when did, to kind of carry on with the timeline, when Pastor Gary recovered, what was kind of, did that start the transition? Did things just start going so well that it was kind of inevitable? Like that backup quarterback gets in, right? The Tom Brady, and Drew Bledsoe's kind of like out the door. What was that like as it continued down the path? Yeah.
And I think, you know, like you said, with Bishop Gary coming off of that medical situation, you know, you still started to see Pastor Michael on stage, you know, even more, to where it's like Bishop Gary does one, you know, Pastor Michael does one. And you just started to see that shared responsibility where actually it was more Pastor Michael on stage than it was Bishop Gary. And so, you know, I think that at that time, people started kind of making assumptions about what was happening and, you know, speculating about what was going on. But then following year, at the top of the year, Bishop Gary had Pastor Michael lead our 21 days of prayer and fasting, and he basically prayed every single night. Just another way to just establish that voice. And then coming out of that was basically the official handoff of the church to Pastor Michael and Natalie as the lead pastors.
Yeah. And if we back up just a little bit, babe, like one of the things I think after Bishop's incident or whatnot, I believe that the story goes that he heard some things from God. And so he knew about the timing. And then he also knew that it was time for Mike to establish his voice in the church more. And so he was given more and more responsibility. One of the things that we weren't doing previously was sermon series, you know, and so that came into the main service, you know, and then I think some of the visual arts things that you would see, or visual things that you begin to see, that became a part of it. And then it was, I think Bishop had a longer plan of when the baton would be tossed, but God had otherwise. And with some other conversations and things like that, knew that February is going to be there. And I feel like it was the last quarter of that year before. And I think Mike came into Bishop and was like, all right, what's the vision for the next year? And he said, I don't have it. You're supposed to get it. And that's where it set up, like it set up a change. Wow. Like you're going to get fresh vision for God for what this church needs to look like, where it's going to go in this transition. And so that 21 days of prayer and fasting where I don't think anybody else led during that time. And it was all him in that first 21. And then it was the transition on February 1st that happened. So and then here we are. It's only been 5 years.
5 years from that moment.
Transition, you know, and that's
so today, there's so many things that I could define as to where things are today. People can see there's 1 million YouTube subscribers. There's, you know, I mean, you just bought a building.
Literally,
not a
literally
building,
a million.
Like
let's be clear.
You just bought it. And this is a 5-year-old church, essentially. But what are some of the milestones between 5 years ago to where you are today? Because it didn't just happen. You know, there was a process of getting to where you are today. What were some of those milestones along the way?
I'll say that it started off with a redefinition of culture. I think that Pastor Michael did an amazing job of laying the foundation of everything that we see today. He did that from day one. So literally that Sunday when the baton was handed off, that was Vision Sunday. And so he literally started talking about what he felt like God was saying for Transformation Church. He talked about the multi-ethnic, the multi-site, the multi-generational. He talked about all of that stuff and laid it out. We established the culture codes that would basically guide every decision that we made. That if it didn't line up with, you know, being hot or fun, or, you know, the different 12 culture codes, or service, like that, we wouldn't do it. And so I think that coming out of the gate was a huge establishment of where we are today.
Yeah.
So.
No, I completely agree with what you said on there. And I think even in that, like, there were some just really game-changing moments with Pastor Tim Ross. Like, to think about how him and P. Mike got connected, which happened in SoFly days. You know, he was younger in his leadership, but even that transition in having a voice like that with him, I think helped. I remember, what was it? Tim Ross said something. This was in, I want to say this was our first year of ministry. And he talked about all the different illustrations and all of that. And I believe that this helped his communication. So we were doing what's called a strat op. And I know a lot of churches end up doing that, and that's to just kind of help build some lanes and get some process systems and all of that. But somebody had communicated just being overwhelmed with a lot of different things. And what was said was, to P. Mike was like, your voice is strong. You don't need all of the illustrations. And I believe that if you focus more on this, then there's going to be the opportunity for you to have the different illustrations. And so I believe that by the fact that he leaned into what our now oversight pastor stated at that time, it helped his communication tremendously over the years. Not to say that it was bad before or anything like that, obviously, but it helped to say, hey, you don't need illustrations. If you work on the communication and don't let the illustration be your crutch. Let it be an addition, or like Jesus did, you know, the parallel. Parable, throw it alongside with what you're communicating to provide other perspectives. So I remember that being stated in the room. And I think that Pastor Mike is submitted. He submitted first to God and to leadership. And we have seen that, I would say, from the infancy of him taking leadership as the lead pastor, for sure.
Yeah, and I would also throw in this radical obedience. Yeah, you know, I think that Pastor Michael did some things that even against good counsel. You know, that he just felt like, well, I feel like God's saying this, and so I'm going to do this. One of those things was that we canceled midweek service, which was like, don't do that. You know, that was kind of unheard of. Like, that was a Greenwood staple. We always had midweek service, and so he was willing to obey God and do things when he got pushback from good counsel. Right. I say another big one was generosity. That was one thing that he said from the very beginning. Is like, we want to be a generous church, and so I remember that first year, we took, I believe it was kind of like the holiday season. We said, hey, let's raise some money to just give to people, to churches, to different causes. And we'd always been a generous church, but I think that was the first time that we were very, very intentional about that generosity.
It started before we started giving away houses. That's right. You know, and it was. That's right. I mean, we talked about this with B1. All you have is all you need, and so it was like, you know what, we're going to do something different. Yeah. Really, just to go back before that, it was tithing. Like, we're going to take the overall organization and set aside 10% of our income, regardless of where the bills are at, whatever we're struggling with, any of those different things. And we're going to set aside 10% to give to God. And so that in turn kind of went to different outreaches or opportunities. I don't know how small it was from at certain times. Like, it was, here goes a movie giveaway on us, or here goes popcorn. Like, whatever we had, it might've been $10, and that's what would happen, you know? So I think that was those were radical obedience, definitely a defining moments for where we're at today.
Yeah. Well, I remember one Sunday, I mean, it was snowing, and a lot of churches in town, they were like, oh no, we're not canceling. And Pastor Michael felt like God said to cancel church. But I mean, as we know in church, like, that's when the capital comes in, that's when the finances come in. And so what does that mean for a church that is just trying to maintain? Right. Like, that means, that's a whole weekend that we miss. And so, but he felt like God said, cancel church for this weekend and prioritize safety over the crowd. And I remember he did it. And actually, that was kind of one of the first big miracles that we saw, like that. Even though we canceled church, everything still came in. Yeah. It's like, wow, God, you really are a part of what we're doing. You really are watching over and leading us in all of this. Yeah. I would say another huge thing was his investment in just high definition cameras to make sure that our visual experience beyond the service was really good. And so coming out of that first year where I think we raised like $8,000 to give away. We came out of that and we had this thing that we did called Heart for the Kingdom.
Yeah.
And our first Heart for the Kingdom project was to basically raise $80,000 to purchase cameras, which was 10 times more than we raised the year before. So we're like, oh God, this is such a big faith goal. But I believe that one decision set the trajectory of where we are now and the global influence that we're getting to experience right now.
And if I could take that a little bit further outside of the camera, is the attention to excellence.
Yes.
It's not just saying, okay, we're a church, so we can just throw any old thing up there. But it really is like, hey, what we want to produce is at this level of excellence. And I know excellence is kind of one of those terms where it's very subjective to what you've been exposed to and all of those things. And I think that played out heavily in just the cameras, the order of service, the execution of different things. And so that's been, it's one of our culture codes. Like, it was in there for a reason, you know? And so you definitely saw that early on. And I think it was definitely pivotal because to put Christ in the middle of culture, you've got to operate out of excellence. You know, we a few years ago killed the term of mom and pop. Hey, there's some things that we're doing that are mom and pop, and it's not going to flow for where God is calling us to go.
Yeah.
This story and I love that story specifically about the cameras, and I've heard it several times of the tension, because every pastor knows that moment of getting pushback or feeling like that's too crazy. And if you're listening to this and if you're not a senior pastor or lead pastor, I'd encourage you to get your lead pastor to listen to the last 5 minutes, because those milestones, I think what you guys just spoke is at the core was the foundation, because none of those things led to where you are today. They were all foundational decisions, you set the culture, you took the risk, at the core though, it's being spirit led. And I think you listened and Pastor Mike listened, and he also listened and chose not to listen to certain voices too, when he felt deep conviction. And so I think all of those things, I think too, the other thing is definition of it was when you talk about how clearly Pastor Mike defined the culture and how clearly he defined, we're going to be multi-ethnic and we're going to be multi-site, that those things, that foundation that set everything up is part of what led you to where you are today. And I think without any of those things, it wouldn't be where it is today. You know, I think all of those things put together, and I think those are essentials for any leader if they're going to see success. I think what people are looking for out of this conversation, I bet they're listening, of like, what's the magic bullet? You know, what's the thing you did to go viral and it worked? It was not one thing. It was a lot of things, and God at the core of listening to this thing. So, okay, so you made some investments. So you had these milestones. Talk about what happened, you know, like where there, because there was a moment where things just like, it was just going and then it just exploded. So talk about the explosion.
Yeah. Well, I want to say this because one thing that we didn't hit on, because culture is very big. That first year, every sermon series was around, and it was creatively done, but it was around the culture code. So it almost spent 4 weeks talking through culture, like relationship or whatever. And so when we got into, what was that? Maybe that's our third year or something like that, where, okay, we've gone to, at that time we were at 2 services. Yeah, you agree. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I remember this time I'm overseeing our creative area and our weekend experience. So, and I've come off of my full-time job, so I'm doing all of the, you know, I'm in the church serving, volunteering, all of those things. So anyway, it's so definitive. I've got a picture on my phone. I've shared it a couple of times, but it was, we knew that some things needed to shift as far as from our staff and in our culture. And so we had this time where we're preparing for staff advance and just trying to see, okay, what does this look like in the future, in the next year? What are we going to end up talking about in October? I think was when Staff Advance was at the time. So we're in a library. Pastor Mike, Tammy, Bree, and myself. D was still working his full-time job, so he was kind of getting stuff back after the fact.
Yeah.
So we had spent a couple of days just locked in, planning and preparing, because P. Mike was about to go on a sabbatical. And it was during that time, like from talking about finances to talking about doing another service. And it was like, okay, well, I think Bree said something like, we got to come out with a strong sermon series, you know? And really, I don't even remember what the sermon series was for that year, but one of the things that P. Mike felt like God was saying, will you put out another vessel for me to fill? And really us talking about going to 2 services was like, okay, God, we're going to put out another vessel. No, we're not at capacity. We don't technically need another service, but we're going to go ahead and put out this vessel for you to fill. And so we made the decision that it was going to be in August, right after he came back. And Bree was like, but we need a strong sermon series. And I think they had been talking about it. And it was like, well, relationship goals, well, it ain't sexy enough. You know, everybody says that. And I mean, literally it just kind of left there. It was got to be relationship goals. And you fast forward, I think that was in June. It was sometime in June before he left, and we had that dialogue. And then July, fun month. You guys already know we've been doing it since the very, very beginning. It's just looked different over the years. And then you come back August, and we start relationship goals, and we go to our 2 service plan, and you start seeing people come. And somewhere, I think it's like August, September, October, somewhere around that time frame, we were preparing for Christmas. And I remember I went into P. Mike's office, and he was like, yo, Jules, like 10,000 people just started following me. Like, I don't know what's going on, like in the last hour, you know, or whatever. I think it was around that time frame, but I remember saying that, and I was like, okay, so we didn't know anything. We get to, I think it was in December that we were starting to do another strat op with our staff. And so we're in there, and we're making all of these different plans and everything. We cancel Christmas because there's so many different things going on. We hadn't fully experienced the growth. What we knew was there were more people coming to our church, right? And then by the time we got to December, it was like, okay, well, these numbers continue to increase from like 300 to 600 to 1,200 and all of that. And then in December, it's like, hey, this is going to put a lot of stress on the team if we continue on this way. And Pastor Tim came in. He spoke some wisdom to our team, for our staff to understand just kind of like what we had been doing. And it's funny because Pastor Mike that year when he was on sabbatical, it was the word of stride, you know, versus striving. And it came all to a head in December of like, hey, he said stride. He didn't fully get it and understand it, and it was like sold on it, but came out of that time frame. And literally in January, I remember just seeing the increase of like people watching our YouTube videos. And I think it was sometime in January, we realized that a video went viral, and every single weekend there were more and more people watching online, and there were more and more people coming in the building. Again, I was over creative during that time. And I remember I sat in Bree's office and I said, yo, I feel like for Easter, we need a plan to have like 5 or 6 services. Now, previously we had done like 4, and I'm just thinking like, Easter for us, you're gonna have dance, you're gonna have rap, you're gonna have all these different things. And so I was like, we need to be prepared because the numbers just continue to grow. And so it's like the whole team was like, oh, that's a lot of numbers. And everything we did plan for in December, or were planning for, was like, scratch that. God said something different, you know? And so that was kind of like, I don't know, the explosion point that we started to feel. And then I believe, I can't remember what the number was for that Easter. We did, I think, 5 services between Saturday and Sunday, and considered doing another one. But I mean, the wear on different bodies and dancing and all of that was crazy. But we saw so many people come, but so many lives transformed in numbers that it was like, droves. Like, this is crazy. This is crazy. God, what are you doing? So, yeah, that's my quick version.
So Demario, if you could share your story with this, because one of the things that's fascinating to me is we talked about you guys being an online pastors duo. The reality is you just became full-time like 2 weeks ago in this role. And that, like, people look at transformation, they assume there's probably 20 people behind this machine. It's been you part-time as your like side hustle, for the church. Talk about your journey into this role.
Yeah, 100%. So, like Jules kind of had told in that story how, once we kind of got to that place where we realized, okay, this is growing, we need all of our people, on deck. She came off of her job first, and then I think about 2 years later, I came off of my job back in 2018. And, I came off full time as the Reach Pastor, which I was overseeing prayer, outreach, pastoral care, and online.
Yeah.
And so like Nils, like you said, I was kind of like this was, one of the four. Yeah. And so just to see like how fast we're growing, I mean, I came into it trying to figure out not how to grow, but how to steward all of this momentum that was already here. Yeah. And so we began to do things like calls to action. We began to, create a consistent hosting team to where, every time there was a live service or a live event, we had people chatting online and responding to questions and all of that stuff. And so, it was definitely, I came in with the floodgates open. Yeah. And so like literally this last 2 years has been a matter of me trying to maintain and to manage and to understand, like, okay, what is happening? Like, what do we do with this crowd? We've got our social media platforms, we got our live services, we got all these different things that are kind of already happening simultaneously. So how do we come in now and begin to resource people? How do we connect with people and make them feel like they've been heard and that kind of thing? And so, basically did that for the last 2 years. And just a few months ago, we officially became the online campus pastors, Jules and I did. And so now we're in the process of offloading the other parts that we were kind of working in and focusing exclusively on our online instance. And definitely excited just about where we're going to go, where we've already come, really, right. I mean, in these last few months, but where we're about to go with the focus effort specifically on our online campus.
Yes, I think it's important just to mention, like, it was the growth demanded restructure for our organization. Yeah. And so when, even prior to D coming on as an organization, like, we've had 17 different hats that we've been running in. And so I think when D came in, we realized that there were some lanes that we kind of needed to be able to somewhat air quotes and functioning in. And so this last time, COVID, it demanded restructure, to see the influence and all of that. So we've had two key defining moments that we experienced growth or felt the impact that Transformation Church has, and it demanded a restructure. And so, like Dee said, we've been offloading. I'm currently doing 3 roles at this time. They're a little bit different, but it's shifted what needs the most attention somewhat.
Yeah. Well, and one of the and I'm always wanting to pull things out for people to learn. I think one of them is you guys as leaders and as in many ways you've sat in a lot of different support roles, but in significant leadership positions. Is you are flexible, and so you flexed when Easter was blowing up or Christmas was blowing up, or you flexed when you had to wear 7 hats, which you continue to wear, but you adapt and you adjust. And I think leaders and organizations have to be flexible if they're going to see success like this. The other thing is I heard it's strategic, these strata sessions is you're spirit led, but you're also strategic in planning and in organizing and adjusting when the Spirit leads you in a different direction. But I think those are some of the keys here. I would love, as you look at where things are, and Pastor Mike recently shared so much on the Karen Newhoff podcast. So if anybody hadn't listened to that episode, I think that's such a great episode.
Changed my life. changed my life and outlook. Just on that, you do need to listen. If you're a listener right now, you've not listened to that, go over to Carrie Newhouse podcast, listen to that. I was listening to that thinking, this is my generation. I'm 29. This is my generation's pastor. Like everybody would talk about like Craig Rochelle, Andy Stanley, Charles Stanley. This is my pastor that is going to lead my generation through the understanding of how do you minister, pastor, evangelize, reach people for Jesus in this day and age. I was listening to that and I was like, this is unbelievable. I've never heard these things before, but it's speaking directly to all the things that I'm wrestling with as a pastor in this day and age. Like Mike Todd is solidifying himself through that podcast, through many other things, but for me, through that podcast of just like this is how you reach the lost, transform the lost for Jesus. You got to listen to it.
So something that I heard, and I want to talk about where we're going, where Transformation Church goes from here. But one of the things I heard Pastor Mike say recently that I've always dreamed of a pastor saying is that we are an online church first. Help explain that, and what does that mean, and what does that mean for the future of Transformation Church?
Yeah.
Well, and maybe let me pause. The other thing the factor that plays into this is, you bought a 4,000 seat auditorium and then you all of a sudden couldn't meet in there like 3 months later. And so that was part of so right now you're sitting in a big empty building.
What I hear, Nils, if they're online church first, what I hear is Dee and Jules are the next, the baton is being passed again to the Tuckers. No, I'm joking.
But it's obviously the leadership is so key of what, it's an online church first, and you guys have been there from the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing just to understand about Pastor Michael is that he has always been outwardly focused. He's always been a paradigm shifter. And I think for him, even talking about this, Nils, when you came on in October and we had our first conversation, and Pastor Mike really began to unpack what he saw in the vision, it was like, see, now, like literally his vision has always been to go beyond the four walls.
Yeah.
And to really like to transform and affect the world. And so I think that really is the underbelly of just this whole thought that, hey, we're a global church. We have our headquarters and our local instance here, but like we're broadcasting to the world, and we're trying to change like actual culture, how people see God, the people's experience with God. And so, I think that really has become just the foundation of that statement that we are a global church, and even going back to like the original vision that we would be multi-ethnic and multi-generational. You just have to get beyond, just having church in order to even think like that.
Yes.
So that's something that's always been a part of his DNA, just a part of, the way that he thinks and the way that he flows. And you guys said it earlier, anyone that works alongside him, you just got to be flexible and just kind of ready for whatever's coming next.
Yeah. And I'll say this, I think it's key to mention this because he started this in the infancy again of his ministry, but the sabbatical was very key because that is a time where he gets fresh vision. Now, the way he saw things in the very beginning, certain things look different now. So redefining, realigning, like, okay, God, what are you saying? The expression is here. And we talked to our Nils, he said this in reference to like the strategy. And I think what I was thinking of is we say the statement, inspect what you expect, and really there's a stewardship responsibility that we have as leaders to inspect what we're expecting, but inspect what God is expecting of us. And so like the strat-ops were important for us. The story branding was important to us. And that allowed us to see what is the expression that God is wanting to get out of Transformation Church. So, and it's important to say that because one of the goals for this year was to launch our online campus. Well, that came out of a season where Pastor Mike took time away to rest and hear vision from God. Like, what are we supposed to do this year? And then for us, it's our responsibility to also hear from God. Like, what is that expression, Dad, that you're calling for us to do? Now, I didn't know I was going to be a part of of that in this way. I knew it was going to be a part, but not in this way. But now it's an understanding, like as a staff, there's a responsibility that we have to steward that, and even to see the numbers, because attached to every number is a soul. Yeah. And so I think it was in January, as we were going over the numbers from the previous year, when we looked at our online audience, it was the average was already over 23,000, And what's funny is that there was a goal being set for there to be, I think, 22,000. It was like, well, we got to go back and see what that looks like. And so where there's 4,000 people that were coming to our campus here, and it was nothing for there to be 50 to 100 first-time visitors, and so now it shifted perspective of who God is calling us to impact. It's not just the ground, but there's a global audience that he's called Transformation Church to steward and to represent too.
Yeah, that's good. I would also say, I think about, one of Pastor Michael's mandates is that there's an apostolic call on him. And so there's a sending out. He's always felt that he's called to go out to different cities, different nations, different countries. And so part of what that does is it puts a lot of ownership of the vision on those that support and that are here running the local instance and making sure that operations are running. And so I think that, just that call for what God has said to him as far as being apostolic and really being a fire starter in other places also plays into, that global, that global reach for our church.
Yeah. For sure.
And I think there's so many things that define that global reach. And I appreciate you guys allowing Aaron and I to kind of be a part of the family and learn so much. I mean, some of the numbers that I think we're still comprehending it, but probably while we were in this Zoom call, there were probably about 10,000 people that watched a sermon on the YouTube channel. There were probably about a dozen people that accepted Christ while we've been on this call, based on the data that we're seeing on a weekly basis. I mean, this is real, and this is happening globally all the time. And I think that's what's possible. And Transformation Church is just leading the way. And one of the things that I love so much about you guys is in Transformation Church, we talk about being hot, like humble, open, transparent. And you guys embody that better than anybody I've ever met, in that you're taking the time, to share with these listeners, to share your story. And I think people can see the humility of you guys are in no ways taking credit. I know enough to know that a lot of the credit is due you guys, but you're never gonna claim that. And I think you're always, and Pastor Mike's not going to claim that. I think it's God claiming that, but I think it's stewardship of the movement of God that you guys have continued to do so well. And so I can't wait to see what's ahead. I think there's no limit, and I think who knows where this all goes. But I appreciate what you're doing, and I think what you're modeling for so many other churches so transparently. I appreciate it. As we wrap up, any final thoughts you guys want to share?
Yeah. Even as you were saying that about stewardship, Nils, I think about one of the first lessons that Pastor Michael told us that Tim Ross, his mentor, gave him, and it was to hold the ministry with an open hand. Yeah. I think, in those beginning years, like when people first started and there was transition of people out and, new people were coming in, but the transition of those, leaders and people that have been pillars, it was tough. I mean, because these were people that he looked up to, people that have given him advice, like just all kinds of great things. And so, but that advice that he received from Pastor Tim Ross to hold the ministry and to hold people with an open hand and don't try to, don't try to control or anything like that. I think that has been invaluable. And because he's been trusted to hold, people with an open hand, and even if those people that left in the beginning have come back, they've been welcomed back, not like, oh, you left in, like, don't come back now. Like there's never been any of that. Like Pastor Michael has literally welcomed those that left in the beginning right back, into places of leadership, places of servant. And so I would definitely leave that with any pastor that is, kind of in the same spot. Like, just know that God's fighting for you, and know that if you hold it with an open hand, he's able to do the rest. And your main job is to obey and just to do what God is saying.
That's so good. And just to piggyback off of that, for anybody who's a leader and they're not the senior leader, you've got to hold your title the same way.
Yeah.
I believe that one of the things in the season that Dee and I are in is that we're graced for where we're at, even though we're playing a lot of hats, and it's asking God, give me wisdom for how to steward this well. I have to abandon my own preferences and just be submitted to God. The heart posture is key. And then for senior leaders, it's this thing, and I think Pastor Mike has modeled this, and he's learned that he's had to kind of give things away. So some key components: vision leaks. And so I know people hear that, but you can't do enough of giving vision, to your people, to your volunteers, to those leaders, to your staff. And then it is a staff responsibility to steward that vision and make sure that if I can get it at the most concentrated level, let me do everything I can not to dilute that when I give it away. And then also rest. Like striding and resting and going at the pace of grace is so important for every leader, every senior leader, and those that you are leading. I believe that those were game changers because God knows more about what is ahead than we could ever do. And I value the time that Pastor Michael spends away, because it's coming back with fresh vision. For our staff, it's saying, hey, have you taken your Sabbath? Because there are things, it requires us to say my dependence is on him and not on me. And so just rest is important. And then the other one is follow the cloud. Like it's God's anyway. And so when God is leading, we want to follow where he's telling us to go. If he's not telling us to go to it and it looks good and it's not God, we'd rather not do it. We'd rather follow where God is leading us. And so that would be my tidbits.
Yeah. Such good words from the Tuckers. Just so thankful to have both of you on, Dee and Jules. Thank you so much for your time. We will definitely have you guys on again in a little bit to get an update on where things are going. Now that you guys have really taken the reins over the past couple of weeks of the online campus at Transformation Church, we're just so grateful. Thank you for hanging out with us today. And just your example, the leadership nuggets you dropped on us.
Hey, well, thank you guys for having us. I mean, obviously we meet every week and have amazing discussions, but it was incredible just to be on the podcast today with you guys.
Post-COVID, we're going to do a party or something. I don't know.
We're going to New York.
On the rooftops of New York or California.
Come on.
Great place.
Do it. Or both. Or both.
Just to make that clear.
Hey, or maybe in one day we can be in Pacific time, Central time, and Eastern time. Just kind of private jet around. I don't know. We got to find somebody with a private jet first. But thank you all for listening today. We hope you're inspired to just take your ministry to the next level, whatever that looks like, and understand the importance of digital ministry as well. So clearly articulated here from Pastor Demario and Julia, and wherever you're listening right now, make sure you hit that subscribe button, write a review. If this has been helpful to you, we'd also love for you to share this around with somebody who needs a little bit of encouragement, and we will see you next time.